Well, everybody, as I'm sure very few of you should be surprised to hear, the extremely radical far-right white nationalist and neo-Nazi rhetoric that has been getting far more acceptable and popular in this sort of like era of conservative cultural dominance lately has resulted in another far-right terror attack. The reason why I say this shouldn't surprise you is despite what the right tends to claim, particularly about trans people lately, the right and right-wing terrorism broadly actually outweighs, statistically, any form of left-wing terrorism by magnitudes. Like, magnitudes upon magnitudes. Right-wing terror outweighs and outnumbers that of any form of left-wing terror. And when left-wing terror does occur, it tends to be against property and not people. As you can imagine, this shooter, he ended up going to a mall in Texas, and he ended up shooting it up. The thing is, the big twist, the thing that kinda makes this a little bit different from other far-right attacks that have happened in the past, such as the Christchurch shooting, which very definitively was tied to, you know, neo-Nazism and white nationalism, and there really was no argument anyone could make that anybody would really listen to who wasn't already a Nazi, that the Christchurch shooter, for example, wasn't a neo-Nazi shooter, right? Like, everybody agreed on that. The only people who tried to argue against it were Nazis and the conservatives implicated in the manifesto. This time, though, there's a twist. The shooter was Hispanic. Now, if you're a based lefty like me, you may be able to recognize the very fundamental, reality that race does not determine one's ideology. That it, like, just because somebody is not white doesn't mean they can't be radicalized into white nationalism. You know, obviously that can happen. And while it is uncommon, you know, most white nationalists, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis do tend to be white, it is not impossible for non-white people to be neo-Nazis. Here's the thing. Despite the fact that there was already copious evidence of this person being a white nationalist right after the shooting happened, the right immediately tried to jump onto the bandwagon of claiming that this person was gang-affiliated because he's brown. That is really the only reason. He's brown, it's in Texas. They tried to say that it was a gang attack and not a white nationalist attack. And oh my god, did the right really try to die on this hill, okay? They pushed hard that this guy was part of, like, MS-13 or the cartel or a gang. They were really desperate to try to claim this guy was not a neo-Nazi. Isn't that interesting, by the way, that so many conservative figures desperately tried to distance themselves from this guy and claim this attacker wasn't a neo-Nazi? Why is there such a strong desire to defend neo-Nazis who commit mass terror? I wonder why. Specifically the neo-Nazis who there's a lot of evidence that they have an online presence where they talk about their beliefs and consume content centered around their beliefs. Why is the right so dedicated to arguing? Let's find out. We're going to find out about that in just a moment. It's very funny. The reason why the right is so desperate to separate themselves from this guy. First, I'm going to read this article, though, so we can get a little bit of info about this shooting, just for people who may not know all the details. Allen, Texas shooting suspect had Nazi tattoos and researched when the mall was the busiest. The man accused of killing 8 people and wounding several others in a mass shooting at a suburban Dallas shopping mall researched when it was busiest and posted photos on social media in mid-April of a store near where he ultimately started his attack. The post by Mauricio Garcia on a Russian social networking site suggests the 33-year-old had been planning the attack for weeks before he stepped out of a silver sedan and opened fire Saturday. Among the dead were 2 school-aged sisters, a couple, and their 3-year-old son, and a security guard. Disturbing clues on social media. His online activity also betrayed a fascination with white supremacy and mass shootings, which he described as sport. Remember, the most dangerous of these people who get radicalized by far-right propaganda online are those that are already dealing with severe mental illness. Because to be fair, while radicalization and dehumanization can absolutely numb people to committing the most vile acts against other human beings, I do think that to reach this level of evil, you have to be mentally ill to some extent. And of course, we know how the right likes to prey on mentally ill people online for their propaganda. Photos he posted showed large Nazi tattoos in his arm and torso, including a swastika and the SS lightning bolt logo of Hitler's paramilitary forces. Now, there were some Nazis and conservatives online trying to say that this is a false flag and this guy wasn't actually a Nazi or far right. And one of the bits of evidence they tried to bring up about this was that the SS tattoos on the guy's right arm had like the bumps along the edges, which are indicative of the tattoo being fresh. The SS tattoo was fresh. However, the swastika tattoo was clearly old. It was very flat. It was, you know, very much an older tattoo. The SS tattoo, on the other hand, was very evidently, to anybody who is familiar with how tattoos look, newer, and they tried to claim that the tattoos, because they were newer, this was part of a organized conspiratorial false flag. Remember, guys, the only, arguments these people have are literally just making up a conspiracy theory on the spot on Twitter, and that's what they'll run with. The online activity contributed to an emerging picture of the shooter Monday. He was discharged from the army in 2008 because of mental health issues. There you have it. And apparently had been working as a security guard, according to neighbors and an army official. Eric Toller, director of training and research at the international research collective Bellingcat.com, said he identified the gunman's profile on the site OKRU, obviously had presence on Russian social media sites, by searching for active accounts with his birth date located in the US. The Associated Press independently verified the account, which also featured an image of a traffic ticket with the shooter's name and birthday, as well as paperwork from a motel where he stayed before the shooting. So this was definitely his social media. The right will try to claim this is fake nonetheless. Federal agents investigating what motivated the shooting have also reviewed the online posts, according to a federal law enforcement official who could not discuss details of the investigation publicly and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. The official also said the gunman had a patch on his chest when police killed him that read Right Wing Death Squad, or RWDS, an acronym for the phrase Right Wing Death... Okay, well, there you go. Popular among right-wing extremists and white supremacy groups. I'll remind you, there is no left-wing death squad group, but, right-wing death squad is just, a thing that exists, and it's yeah, the hate terror group right-wing death squad. Yeah, there's no lefty equivalent to this, except, I guess, Antifa, which is, a meme that the right has turned into a boogeyman. So it does strike me as hilarious from time to time how blatantly unbalanced the amount of moral corruption the right has compared to the left, and yet somehow in American politics we're still expected to act like this is some sort of equal discourse of ideas between two parties, two groups that want to enforce or want to reach a positive, good future for America and the world, but have different ways of going about it. That is not the reality of politics in this country, okay? The Republicans that are trying to gain power as we speak are genuinely evil people, in the vast majority of cases. So, we have seen some interesting, responses from the right in all of this. I also want to add a bit of a response to the question I posited at the beginning of this, and the answer to that is actually very funny. Why is the right so desperate to distance themselves from this Nazi shooter? Well, as it turns out, not only was the Nazi mass shooter a regular, neo-Nazi, forum poster type, but he was also a fan of conservative media on YouTube. Content creators such as Tim Pool, Just Pearly Things, Nick Fuentes, and other public figures. who he'd literally posted on his social media having watched. He was a fan of these figures and had multiple screenshots of him watching their clips and their videos on his social media. Because this neo-Nazi, who literally went out and murdered 8 people, was a fan of the conservative, like, media industrial complex online. That's why all these, like, supposedly just conservative figures feel so desperately a need to argue this guy wasn't a Nazi, because this Nazi who went out and murdered people is a fan of them. Just like the Christchurch shooter back in 2019 was a fan of Candace Owens and other far-right figures like Lauren Southern. Hell, the Christchurch shooter named his manifesto The Great Replacement, which was the conspiracy theory that Lauren Southern popularized. It's really wild. Anyway, so the right's response to this has been a desperate dash to attempt to separate themselves and distance themselves and disown this guy, right? And a good example of this is this tweet interaction that the end of this tweet interaction is my tweet, and I feel like the meme that I replied with was perfect, okay? So this lady, Isabella Riley Moody, I imagine this is just another, like, one of those conservative media accounts that's probably like 50% of the followers are sex bots that just bought the blue check mark and blew up in the algorithm just by spamming right-wing propaganda, because I'd literally never heard of this person until recently. And, like, with the new Elon Twitter blue check mark shit, I'm seeing new conservative media grifters popping up on Twitter with, like, tens of thousands of likes in their tweets every day. It's actually wild. Anyway, she tweets, "Texas is fucked. The Allen, Texas shooting was 50 minutes away from me, and the shooter was a Hispanic gang member, desperate. Likely tied to the cartel. Now another Hispanic man took an SUV and killed 7 people in Brownsville, Texas. Biden's border is killing people." So they're like, a literal neo-Nazi goes and murders 8 people, including children, and is, like, a known neo-Nazi. Like, the evidence was already out this person was a neo-Nazi because his social media was found instantly. And their immediate response is, fuck, we've got to distance ourselves, but we also need to make this about how brown people are actually the bad ones. We need to push more Nazi propaganda in response to this somehow. Like, not only trying to, like, talk down the idea of this person having been, inspired by their rhetoric, but then also sneaking in Nazi propaganda in your response. Absolutely phenomenal. So she ends up getting quote tweeted, or responded to, I should say, by somebody named Keith Olbermann, who replies, "Dear fuckhead, the mass murderer was, like you, a white supremacist lunatic," and links a Washington Post article where, the gunman who opened fire and not was at least 8 people, was a man in his early 30s who has white supremacist neo-Nazi beliefs. Basically just the actual, like, true story. And she then quote tweets this guy saying, "Dear fucking retard," in all caps, "why would a Mexican be a white supremacist? You fake news shill," in all caps. "Maybe you should focus on getting your ratings up before you call a pregnant woman a fuckhead on Twitter, bitch." I don't know what why it's relevant that she's a pregnant woman, but okay. And then you get the reader's added context they thought people might want to know. A Hispanic name does not preclude white nationalist or racist ideology. Hispanic white nationalists and white fascists notably include Nick Fuentes and Enrique Tarrio. Then a link to a source on that. The neo-Nazi website, The Daily Stormer, has also begun targeting a Spanish-speaking audience. And then a source for that as well. So, like, the basic idea that, like, a Hispanic person could be a Nazi is supposedly, like, just absurd to these people. Or at least they'll pretend it is. Then you've got a based Merrick reply, or quote tweet, I should say, to that tweet. "This is his torso. These are his tattoos." And you've got the SS lightning bolt tattoo, which you can see is a little bit bumped up and raised, so it's a newer tattoo. But that swastika tattoo is certainly an older one. There's no evidence to indicate that is a newer tattoo. So yeah, this does not look like the body of a not Nazi. I'm gonna be honest, this guy looks like... If I saw a movie where, like, a guy was in prison and some white supremacist Nazi gang member, like, approaches him to, like, try to induct him into their, like, Nazi gang, and he, like, wasn't wearing a shirt and he looked like this, I would honestly be like, well, that's a little excessive, you know? Like, yeah, they'd have Nazi gang tattoos, but that's a little bit over the top, you know? Like, this guy's committed. Yeah, this guy's role-playing the guy from American History X. And then I ended up replying with, frankly, whenever a conservative says that, like, Hispanic people or just brown people generally can't be racist, I always love to think of this meme, okay? I literally have this meme saved on my computer, and it was the first thing I thought of when I saw all of this discourse happening. Go back to your country. We don't want your kind here. This is so real. This is so ridiculously real, it's not even funny. Regardless, there are a lot more conservatives who've been desperately coping to try to claim this shooter was not a Nazi. In fact, if chat wants, they could probably spam a bunch of links to examples of this, but chat's generally not good at supplying links. But, like, it is wild watching as these supposed not Nazi figures desperately try to argue that this Nazi mass shooter wasn't a Nazi because... For no other reason than because this guy makes them look bad, because they cater to Nazis. It's really just that simple.